the STC webinar. This is our Toxicology 101 webinar, and we're so thrilled to see so many folks who are interested in this event, and we're excited to welcome Dr. Erin Shapiro to lead this session for us. My name is Catherine Palella. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Toronto, and I'm also a member of the STC Communications Committee, which is the committee that's facilitating tonight's event. The session is going to work with a little bit of a presentation from Dr. Shapiro, and then we're going to chat about graduate opportunities to study toxicology in Canada, and we'll finish off the hour with a little bit of a question and answer period facilitated by my co-committee member, Lisa Chang. And with that, Dr. Shapiro, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself. I don't want to speak too much about who you are and what you've done because I think that's going to be covered in your session, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, I think I'll sort of introduce myself throughout the course of my presentation. I just want to give you sort of an overview of how I got to where I am, and hopefully give you some insights into how you can find your way within the field. So I've always been told by my students that if I don't put learning objectives, I get in trouble. So the learning objectives for today are to understand the basic principles and importance of toxicology, and I'll keep it very brief, but just to give you sort of a flavor of what this field really entails. Be familiar with different training opportunities within toxicology. So I'll talk about what I did. I've gotten a cheat sheet from one of my former classmates to give you some insights into what she's done. And then I'm hoping that from that you can identify your personal career goals and how they align with job opportunities within the field. So with that, the outline is basically I'm going to talk about toxicology, talk about myself, and then talk about what I think my advice at least is to you through this journey that you have in finding a career. So for those of you who are not familiar with the field, toxicology, and there are many definitions, but I've always defined it as the study of adverse effects of naturally occurring and anthropogenic substances on biological organisms. So what does that mean? Well, we have the adverse effects. So it could be some change to behavior, inflammatory, so it could affect your immune system, mutagenic, it can affect your DNA, teratogenic, it can affect development of an embryo or fetus. There is organ-specific toxicity to the liver, brain, lungs, etc. And the most severe outcome from toxicity of a substance would be a fatality. So you can die from exposure to a chemical, which is sort of my focus. Mentioned naturally occurring or anthropogenic substances. So pesticides, metals, solvents, radioactive materials, animal toxins, plants, microbial toxins, basically any substance that someone can be exposed to can potentially be considered within the realm of toxicology. And then biological organisms. So we are biological organisms, as are animals, marine life, and ecosystems. And so there's a number of different fields of study, and this is not an all-inclusive list. Oh, do we have issues with hearing me? Can everyone hear me? Something in the chat.
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
Okay, I will speak up just in case. But there are many fields of study within toxicology, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but there is environmental toxicology, food, forensic toxicology, which is what is the field I work in, clinical toxicology, which I sort of work in as well, occupational, and regulatory. And so when we think of toxicology, we think of Paracelsus, and he's been coined with a phrase that is not in English, but I've done my best to translate it to all substances have the potential to be toxic, but it is the dose that separates a poison from a remedy. And I found a great picture. I can't remember where I found it, but I think it's in one of the Casaret and Duels books, one of the editions of Casaret and Duels. It basically says the dose makes the poison. So they have this great example of, I think it's corn or some sort of grain being dumped in, sort of sprinkled on someone's head from a window above. And you can see that he's sort of bathing in it. It's not affecting him in any adverse way because the dose is low. On the right, though, you have the same situation, but instead of it being sprinkled lightly onto this individual's head, the whole bag is dropped onto his head, and he's not very happy about that. So that's, I think that's a great analogy for what toxicology is. It's not that every a small bit of a poison can affect you. It's just a small amount of anything is probably not going to cause an adverse effect, and a large amount of that, of any given substance, has a potential to cause some sort of adverse effect. So when we think of career opportunities within toxicology, it's extremely broad because we're really looking at the relationship between a chemical and a biological organism. So, if you think about what types of chemicals we're exposed to, the list is sort of endless, and the applications are also endless. But I'll give you an example just of what I do, just so you have a sense of the kind of work that could exist, and I'll try to give some other examples as we go. So this is one of the first cases I worked on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what I do after, but I basically work in death investigations, overseeing drug testing to determine a cause and manner of death. I generally can't share information about the cases I work on, but this one was plastered all over the news for several years, so I can safely say that I collected all this information from news articles and did not use any of my confidential knowledge of this case to leak any information. But this was a case of a 52-year-old millwright who fell ill while repairing a pipe at a gold mine. He was basically just working on a leaking pipe at this gold mine and started to experience a headache. He was dizzy, he had chest pains and heart palpitations. So naturally, his coworkers who were in the vicinity assumed he was having a heart attack, and they provided supportive care. He was airlifted to a hospital and died en route. So it was assumed that this was a heart attack, no big deal, but they did send samples for toxicology testing. And sure enough, we found cyanide in his system. So the cause of death was ruled later by the coroner to be acute cyanide intoxication. So the toxicologists in us should be wondering, how does a man who's working on fixing a pipe die from cyanide toxicity? So it's really a question of the kinetics. So what are the effects of the body on a toxicant? And we're less interested in the distribution, metabolism, and elimination in this case. We just want to know, how did cyanide get into his body? So it's really the absorption. And where did the cyanide come from? So it turns out that cyanide is used in the process of separating gold from whatever rock slurry it's contained within. So the days of panning for gold are long gone. It's basically now areas that are rich in gold get sort of excavated, the rock gets ground up, and chemically the gold is isolated from everything else. It basically treating the slurry with cyanide causes the gold to float to the top, and you can skim it off, which is a much more efficient way of doing things than looking in riverbeds. So we know that the cyanide was present because they were working with it. So how could he have been exposed to the cyanide? So there's absorption through the skin or mucous membranes. There's inhalation, ingestion, or injection. unlikely that he ingested or injected the stuff. Inhalation was a big concern, but he was working with a whole bunch of other people, and it's unlikely in a situation where there's exposure through the air to a toxic substance that only one person would fall ill and everyone else would be totally fine. So we went with the dermal absorption route as our hypothesis. And the reason for that is because we know that cyanide in its salt form is used in the isolation of gold. It's a non-volatile substance, and it doesn't get absorbed transdermally very well in the salt form. Hydrogen cyanide, on the other hand, is highly volatile and has high transdermal absorption. And it exists in this equilibrium with a pKa of 9.2. So to be extra careful, if you learned the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, to be extra careful, they go 2 pH units above the pKa to make sure that it's pretty much all in the salt form and does not exist in the hydrogen cyanide form. In order to do that, though, they use sodium hydroxide. So the sodium hydroxide keeps the pH high, which keeps it in the salt form. There are no issues with volatilization. And that's why none of the workers around him were exposed to cyanide. It stayed in the salt form. So then the question is, how does a non-volatile, poorly absorbed substance end up getting into the body, crossing the skin? Well, it turns out that, I'm sure all of you know, sodium hydroxide is highly corrosive. And when we're talking about dermal exposure to a corrosive substance, we think of the skin as being a barrier that can keep substances out. If we abrade or damage the skin in some way, we lose that barrier. So that's what happened in this case. At autopsy, they found that he had severe chemical burns to parts of his body that were attributed to basically being bathed in this slurry containing sodium hydroxide and not wearing proper protective gear. He was just wearing basically working clothes or workers' clothes. So as a result, there were criminal charges that were placed on people who worked at this gold mine, and major lawsuits that resulted from it. So that's sort of in a nutshell what I do, and I'll talk more about that later. But going back to other areas within the field, there's a lot that can be done in academia, in industry, in government, CROs, so contract research organizations, consulting companies, as well as healthcare. And you'll notice that the background has changed. This is because these slides were provided to me by a former classmate, Dr. Lithia Miller, who now works as a consultant within the field of regulatory toxicology. So I'll do my best to get her message across here. But again, there's a lot of different fields within toxicology that can be where people can get jobs, and a good example of that is within drug development. So we have this slide that's provided by the FDA to show the path from 15,000 compounds going down to one approved drug. And within that process, you have the discovery phase. So you have a target in mind. So let's say we want to, there's a receptor within the body that we want to target. What drugs can we use or can we develop that will activate that target? What else will they activate in the process? Are they bioavailable? Do they distribute to the organ that is of interest? Once all that's sort of figured out, we can sort of narrow down our list a little bit more to figure out, okay, well, what has efficacy? So what does what we want it to do, and what has toxicity? What do we not want it to do? So that's done mostly within preclinical testing. So that's in vitro analyses as well as animal work. So you can imagine that there's a lot of jobs that exist within drug discovery, preclinical testing, both on the in vitro side and the in vivo side. If you find a drug that meets all the requirements for safety and efficacy, then you can move on to a clinical trial. And there's different stages of clinical trials, which means there's different companies and jobs involved in seeing those go from start to finish. Then once they meet the regulations for passing clinical trials, they still have to go through review through FDA or Health Canada or other regulatory agencies. So there are jobs there. And then the drugs get manufactured, and there's all kinds of issues associated with toxicity in the manufacturing process. Are there contaminants within a formulation? Do we need to monitor the production of a pharmaceutical or other product to make sure that there's nothing interacting with that chemical of interest before it gets released into the market? And then there's post-approval as well. So just within drug development, there are an endless number of possible jobs, and that's why the average total cost is over $1 billion to get a drug from development or from discovery all the way to implementation. So my former classmate had a job when she first started out working as a study director. So she had a PhD. We did our PhDs together in sort of developmental toxicology. And she worked for a contract research organization looking at basically developmental and reproductive toxicity of various substances that her company was tasked with studying. So she had sponsors, which were companies that were developing new drugs or new chemicals for a number of purposes. They would seek out bids from CROs like hers or others to conduct specific studies. So she was looking specifically at, do these drugs have the potential to cause birth defects, or do they have any effect on the reproductive system? She was, as a study director, she was a single point of control for these non-clinical studies, and basically used her advanced knowledge of the FDA guidelines to ensure that the studies were done properly and would basically pass all the regulatory hurdles as they arrived through this drug discovery process. She wanted to stress this idea of GLP, which is good laboratory practice, and this has come up. I've heard it come up in interviews for jobs within my field, which is forensic tox, which does not follow GLP. GLP is a protected term. It's basically a regulation set up by the FDA for a specific purpose, and it requires that people follow. It's a 19-page booklet which contains a lot of standards. So really important when you're speaking in an interview about how you follow good practices in the lab, that you don't say that you follow good laboratory practices, because they're different things, and it doesn't look good if you don't actually have experience in GLP. But yeah, so she wanted to also highlight that the role of a study director was really to oversee all aspects of the study, but she didn't, basically she didn't get her hands dirty in a way. There were technical staff who handle animals, as well as some of the in vitro tests. There were other administrative staff who ordered animals, worked on protocols. So it's sort of the study director sort of oversees the team, but there's jobs as study directors, and those are people who typically have PhDs, but not always. And then there's jobs as animal handling staff, people who do biochemical analyses, various bioassays throughout, and then all the support staff that go with it. So if you want to be a study director, it's a good idea to get a PhD. You can do it with a Bachelor of science or a master's of science, but it's usually more difficult to get in. These types of jobs typically require reaching the diplomat level with the American Board of Toxicology, so it's the DABT. If you have a PhD, you can get one after 3 years, or you can qualify to write the exam after 3 years. If you have a master's degree, it's 7 years of work experience, and a bachelor degree, it's 10 years experience. And you don't get credit for time working in grad school. This is sort of on-the-job experience that's required. So yeah, you can be involved with one component of the drug development process, but not the whole pipeline. So a hypothetical example that I was given was, I have a drug I developed in my garage. I notice when I put it on my skin, and don't do this at home, it makes my psoriasis go away. What are the next steps if you want to share this miracle compound with the population? You can't just give it to people and say this is a drug that cures psoriasis. You have to go through this whole drug development process. So I mentioned the study director would look at one test within one aspect of this development process, generally in the preclinical realm. But then there's also consulting services. So they know everything about the FDA, Health Canada, and EU regulations for how to get a drug or healthcare product from start to finish. So these are people who are not involved with the day-to-day or the the specific study designs, but they look at the whole process and can provide information about what regulations need to be followed, what sorts of tests should be done, and so on. So I hope I didn't butcher that too much. There's a reference at the bottom here for the ICH guidelines, and I hope you got something out of that. But I'll go back to the Black background so you know that we're talking about me again. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into how I ended up in my current role. And first, I just wanted to mention that I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but you can tell the age of a toxicologist by their version of Casseret and Duels, which is sort of the Bible of toxicology. So I use the 6th edition. We're currently on the 9th edition, and I think there's a 10th one coming out. So that should give you a sense of my age. But I started my undergrad career in the biomedical toxicology program at the University of Guelph. Toxicology still exists at the University of Guelph, but this program no longer does, and it's in the form that I started in. And I'm often asked how I chose this program. Part of it was my mom wanted me to be a doctor, and I didn't, but I wanted to be a chemist, and I thought that this was a nice compromise. It also sounded cool. It had I could study toxic things. It had a nice mix of sort of the medical science side of things as well as chemistry, which is what I actually enjoyed. So I went through the program, loved it, didn't know what I wanted to do after, but I had an in with a lab in Montreal. So this was just a pure fluke. My brother went to school with someone whose dad worked in a lab at the Montreal Neurological Institute at McGill. I figured this was an opportunity for me to move to Montreal, which is something I always wanted to do, and figure it out from there. So I worked in a neuroimmunology lab that looked at multiple sclerosis research, and I learned primary cell culture and immunoassay techniques, which turned out to be very useful. Didn't love the actual work, but I liked the people I was working with, and so I almost started a program, a master's program, with this project looking at endogenous ligands. So the idea was to try to identify the origins of multiple sclerosis by seeing if there was some way in which the body would activate its own immune system to basically cause this autoimmune disease. And we had a lot of trouble, particularly with trying to get messenger RNA to activate the cells that we were studying. So I enlisted the help of Dr. Carrico, who was at the University of Pennsylvania at the time, this is completely unrelated to my career path, but I thought it was an interesting story, so I'm going to share. I got some information from her. She was very, I basically just sent an email to her asking, can you help me with my project? Because I can't figure out how to activate the immune system in cells. And she had a lot of experience with activating the immune system with messenger RNA, as well as getting messenger RNA into cells without activating the immune system. I found the topic, I really enjoyed our conversations, but I found the topic really dull, so I left that altogether. It was only last year that so I hadn't talked to Dr. Carrico since, and last year I heard her name in a podcast, and it turns out that she's now the senior vice president of a company called BioNTech, and her technology was used to develop the mRNA vaccines for against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So yeah, that's my claim to fame. And if I had stuck it out with this project, I might have been able to, make a lot of money as a vaccinologist. But that didn't happen. Instead, I found Dr. Laurie Chan at McGill, who at the time was looking at food security and environmental toxicity, which was much more aligned with my interests. So I contacted him. I told him about my experience working with cell culture and immunoassay, and he was thrilled to take me on one condition, and that was that we weren't going to be in McGill anymore. He had resigned his position at McGill and accepted a new position at the University of Northern BC, which is in Prince George. And for those of you who don't know the geography of BC, it's smack in the middle of the province. It's about an 8-hour drive north from Vancouver. It is very remote and very cold, but a beautiful campus. So I did my master's there. Actually had a great time, learned a lot about basically opening up a lab, because he did not have a lab when we first started. So it was a lot of ordering, setting up equipment and so on. Had a great time and decided that I wanted to go to the next step, which was a PhD, and had a lot of pressure from my family to move back to Toronto. So I did, and I contacted Dr. Peter Wells, who was someone that I met when I was doing my undergrad at the University of Guelph. We actually contacted him to give the keynote address at our annual symposium. So I was familiar with his work, and I had met him in person. So I just called him up and I said, "Can I work for you?" And he, after meeting me, he said that I seemed normal enough and that he'd be happy to take me. So I did my PhD, and when I finished, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go through, basically starting again with research projects in academia. So I just put my resume out there to everywhere. And I started probably about 6 months before I defended my thesis, just to give myself some time to figure out where I wanted to go. And I ended up taking a job in Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario with the Center of Forensic Sciences. I don't know why I took it. I was excited about the opportunity to work in the field. The idea of working as a forensic scientist sounded really cool. Sault Ste. Marie was probably not my first choice of places that I'd like to move to, but it was very affordable. I was able to buy a house on a single income, which was very, very unique, because it certainly doesn't happen in most major cities these days. And I figured, I spent 2 years in Northern BC. I got a lot out of it. I enjoyed living there. It can't hurt to move to Sault Ste. Marie. So I moved there, and I convinced my girlfriend, who's now my wife, to join me. And I learned that, it's great to move to new places and experience new things, but there are other factors, especially as you get older, that can make life difficult. So in this case, my wife, who's a naval engineer, could not find a job in Sault Ste. Marie. There are not very many jobs available for people. And even though we were okay financially because it was cheap to live there, she wasn't very happy. So after living there for 3.5 years, I was going to transfer my job to the Toronto office of the Center for Forensic Sciences. But I looked around in the process as well to see if there were any other jobs available. And one came up in Vancouver, which meant that I could go here on weekends. So this is Whistler for those of you who haven't been, and I'm a big skier. So I took a job with the Provincial Toxicology Center in Vancouver, and this is our lab. We're a small but mighty group. We're affiliated with the Provincial Health Services Authority, which is basically the healthcare crown corporation within the province. The BC Centre for Disease Control, which looks at public health for BC, and I do have cross appointment with the University of British Columbia, which is a nice added bonus. So in this role, I oversee drug testing for the BC Coroner Service, and I am involved in sort of the death investigation process. One of the things I noticed when I started working in this lab, though, was that we had a very small number of people for the amount of work that we do, and it was difficult to get the work done. So I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to collaborate with people from Health Canada as well as the Public Health Agency of Canada. And even though there wasn't direct applicability to the work that we were doing, they really liked the data that we were generating. So what I was able to do was convince them that if we had a way to easily process our data, we could share it with them. So I was given access to some of their programmers who work with Visual Basic, R, and Python. And it's amazing the transformation that we've had. So we can basically do 10 times as much work as we used to do because a lot of it's automated. So if you have these skills, they are hugely valuable, not just within a high throughput toxicology lab like mine, but in various fields within the realm of toxicology. And I just wanted to mention one other thing that I've done in the past few years. So I've tried to put my name out to, I'm sort of mid-career now, and I want to get to the point where I can accomplish all of my goals. So one thing I wanted to do was get my name out to the toxicology community, and I did this through attempting to host a conference through the International Association of Forensic Toxicologists. And I worked with the Vancouver Tourism Board to put it through a bid. Unfortunately, we didn't get it, but the Tourism Board did reach out to me after when STC put out a bid to host another meeting in 2028. And we'll find out within a month or so whether or not we got that bid. But through that, through that failed attempt, I did manage to get in touch with people from STC, and that's why I'm here today. So I just wanted to sort of give you this story of my career path, to give you a little bit of insight into what's possible when you keep an open mind and you just go with the flow in a way. And it's not to say that you can't plan for what life might throw at you, but this has worked out pretty well for me, and it didn't require any any sort of planning, in the sense that I didn't have a specific goal in mind. I wasn't disappointed along the way, but everything sort of worked out well for me. So that brings me to the section about you. So my advice to you is really just to follow your strengths and interests, take advantage of opportunities. So I took advantage of that summer job that could have turned into a master's degree at McGill. I learned the lab techniques. I've also collaborated with a number of people from various parts of my life. So I met my PhD supervisor from my undergrad. I met STC members through this failed conference attempt. And then take advantage of your youth. So I moved to Prince George without thinking about it. I was unattached at the time, and it was easy for me to basically take 2 suitcases and fly across the country and I learned a lot, met a lot of great people, had an amazing experience while there. It was fantastic. So while if you're at the point where you don't have anything keeping you from traveling, I highly recommend just basically going wherever the road takes you, and don't dwell on what could have been. So I have this picture in my mind of being this billionaire who studied neuroimmunology, developed a vaccine for a pandemic that eventually came, and started a company like Moderna. It didn't happen, but I'm still happy with the way my career has turned out. Always keep an open mind, just go with the flow. Have an idea of what you want to do, but be open to other opportunities and learn to code, because it's amazing what you can do, or what a computer can do for you. Other considerations, if you want to work remotely, there are certain jobs that you can do and certain jobs that you can't do. So obviously you can't do bench work or field work from your home office. Certain jobs require you to move. My job, I'm pretty much, I am the only person in my role in this country, or sorry, in this province. So if I were to take on a new position, it would mean I would have to leave Vancouver, which would make me sad. But it's something to consider. And then salaries really depend on the job. If you Google 10th triennial toxicology salary survey, you can get a sense of what the jobs pay. If you have a medical degree, you'll make more money, but most people in the field do very well. And again, the DABT, or the forensic equivalent, which is the ABFT, is a good way to make yourself employable in various fields. And then final tip is go to conferences, network with people, and try to get some face-to-face time. I get a lot of people who add me to LinkedIn. I don't really look at LinkedIn, and I don't remember people who are on my LinkedIn. If you have the opportunity to see someone at a conference, just introduce yourself. You might even get them to buy you a drink out of it. So there's lots of good that can come from it. It can also lead to publications and other job opportunities. And just enjoy the journey. Don't worry about what could have been. Just go with the flow, and you'll do great. And that's all I have. I think there's some additional discussions now, and then I'll be happy to answer questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Dr. Shapiro. Thank you for sharing your story and for sharing all of that great advice at the end. That's wonderful. We've had a couple of questions come in, but we're going to hold off on them just for a few more minutes because Nazem, who is a board member at the STC, is going to be sharing with us some opportunities for graduate studies in the field of toxicology and a little bit more about STC. And then we'll do the question. So I'll turn it over to you, Nazem.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Shapiro. It was really interesting to learn like how you moved to where you are right now, and it shows that there are many paths to becoming a toxicologist. And just to kind of segue from one of your last points about networking and how it's important to be able to not only get into the field of toxicology, but be able to get a career as a toxicologist. So I'd like to briefly talk to all the attendees about the Society of Toxicology of Canada, so the STC. So the STC was founded in 1964 as a not-for-profit scientific organization, and it has hundreds of members from Canada that come from the industry, the government, and the academic institutions, who are all related to the field of toxicology in one way or another. And the STC is also one of the founding members of the International Union of Toxicology. So many countries have their own version of STC, and the IUTOX, or the International Union of Toxicology, represents all of them. And we're hoping that the upcoming IUTOX conference will be happening in Vancouver which Dr. Shapiro alluded to earlier. So fingers crossed that that works out. So if you want to learn more about the STC, we have a website. You can go to stcweb.ca, and you'll find all the information that I present to you here today. So the mission of the STC is to be a community of toxicologists from all over Canada that is committed to advancing the understanding of toxicology and to promote interaction, collaboration of professional toxicologists in Canada, and to be a significant resource of expertise and knowledge, and to actively participate in the evolution of the discipline of toxicology in the world. And we try to do this through various services and events. The main one being the STC Annual Symposium. So this is the STC conference that happens once a year. And I'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. We also have a newsletter where we share news that is related to the STC, related to our members, and related to toxicology in general. And we also notify our members and the general public about meetings, courses, and seminars that are related to toxicology that are happening in Canada and internationally. And we also advertise job openings that are related to toxicology in Canada. Also, if you're a member of the STC and let's say you have some sort of achievement, whether it's publishing a paper, writing a book chapter, starting a new career, promotion, or winning an award, then we would advertise that on our social media and to our members. And for our members, they also have access to recordings of past symposiums, seminars, and other recorded events like this one. And you also get the chance to network with other members of the STC. And as I mentioned earlier, many of our members come from the industry and academia and the government. So, you know, it's a very beneficial way for being able to secure a career in toxicology. And then we also provide guidance on education and careers in toxicology in Canada. So if you're interested in pursuing an undergraduate or a graduate degree in toxicology, then we provide resources to kind of help you, guide you towards that. And then finally, for members of the STC who are undergraduate or graduate students or postdoctoral fellows, they receive reduced rates for attending the annual symposium. So I'd like to talk to you quickly about how to become a member. So there are 4 categories of membership, and there's their annual fees. So there's the regular membership, which is $150. And then there's the trainee membership. So this is more for graduate students who are doing their master's and PhD or postdoc, and that's only $35 a year. And then there's a new category that was just added last year, which is for undergraduate students, and they can join for free. And then the 4th one is for retirees, which is just for $35 one-time payment a year. So compared to other societies, these fees are very low. And of course, if you're an undergrad, then I would say this is a very good opportunity to be able to join a scientific society in Canada. So to become a member, you have to submit an online application by one of 4 deadlines that happen every year. So the next one will be October 1st. So you need to submit a CV. You need to have a sponsor who is a regular member of the STC. And you have to be enrolled in an academic program that has a major emphasis on toxicology. So you have to have some sort of exposure to toxicology in your education. Now, if you don't know a sponsor, you don't know an STC member, you can email us at info@stcweb.ca, and we can assist you with that. And again, you can find all this information on the website. Now, as I alluded to earlier, we do have resources for what programs in Canada offer toxicology related courses, or it's programs that offer toxicology courses. And so if you go on the website under the tab called resources, you'll find a list of programs that are offered by different universities across the nation. And so this is not a comprehensive list. We're trying to update it as much as possible, but it could be a starting point. And you can see that it's broken down by bachelor's, master's, PhD, and other diplomas. So I encourage you to visit the website and to learn more through that. So lastly, I want to talk about the 54th STC Annual Symposium. This year, the theme is on environmental and lifestyle exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals from cells to society. It will take place over 3 days from November 30th to December 2nd. And it will be both in person and online. So there's both an in-person and virtual component to it. In person, it will take place in downtown Ottawa, Ontario. And the program will involve plenary lectures, short talks, poster presentations, and of course, social networking events. And there are many opportunities for students, especially to present both short talks and poster presentations. Now, the cost to attend the conference differs depending on the category of your membership or if you're a member or not. So of course, it's cheaper if you're a member. So for a trainee member, for example, it could range from $150 to $250 if you're attending in person, and from $50 to $150 if you're attending online. And of course, it's more expensive if you're not a member. And if you are able to submit an application by the October 1st deadline, you would be able to, and you're successful in becoming a member, you would be able to get the reduced rates for attending the conference. There are also travel and presentation awards available to trainees. So if you do want to present, I would encourage you to apply to be considered for these awards. And just as a reminder, if you do want to attend the conference, the early bird deadline is October 28th. If you wait after that deadline to register, you still can, but the fee will increase up to a maximum of $250 or $150 if you are a member. And you can register online on the STC website as well. Okay, so that's all I had to say for the STC. I hope you visit the website. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. And looking forward to having more members join the community. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nazem, so much for the brief introduction for STC and how to become a member. I just want to use this opportunity to invite our attendees to ask any questions that they may have into our Q&A box, as we are having our question and answer period right now. And again, I want to thank Dr. Shapiro for the amazing presentation there. I think some of your tips at the very end really resonated with some of our attendees, because we've been getting a lot of questions, especially with learning how to code, which you had put in capital letters. Some of our attendees are wondering what programming language that you would recommend to start learning for this field. And then there's a couple follow-up questions with that.
That's a difficult question for me to answer because I'm not an expert in coding. I usually rely on other people who know what they're doing to do my coding for me. But generally, every job requires that you work with some sort of software, and you could do the same job for two different companies and use completely different software. So when you're thinking about coding, I think you want something that is open source and that is compatible with pretty much anything else that you could work with. So I find R and Python work really well for that purpose. They are, I think Python's a little bit easier to learn than R, but they're not the most trivial pieces of software to work with. And I sort of struggle now because I'm trying to get to a point where I can, modify other people's code so that it, if my data source changes, I can, tweak it without having to call them up to help. So I found that Harvard X is a good source. They provide free courses online. YouTube and Google are your friends, but I think really what you want to do is get a sort of a basic understanding of whatever programming language you work with, so that you know how to do an internet search to see what other people have done with your specific problem. So, for me, if I don't really understand what what a string is or what a variable is, it's hard for me to look at a help forum to figure out, well, you just take the string and you add a variable to it. So get a basic understanding of a program and then use that to your advantage to basically read through forums to figure out what you want to do.
Okay, awesome. You already answered the follow-up question, which was what are some platforms or some resources that students could look towards for learning coding? And you explained a couple like Google, YouTube, and Harvard X as well.
Maybe we'll switch gears a little bit and transition to folks who are just finishing up their undergrad. Some of the questions in the chat are asking about some entry point career options for folks that might be just finishing, if you have any ideas on that or places that people can look.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially I saw there was a comment sort of pertaining to all this remote learning that we've been doing over the past few years. It's not easy to get your foot in the door, either straight from school or into the workforce, or even going from one degree to the next. But what I found is that opportunities open up if you put yourself out there. So things like within your undergrad, if you approach a professor and ask if you can volunteer for them or do some sort of work study or do a thesis within their lab, you'll get experience with whatever techniques they use. You might get a publication out of it. If all goes well, you'll be on good terms with that professor, and they have networks as well. So just be friendly, be open to opportunities, and hopefully that will work. If you go to conferences, then don't be a stranger. Feel free to go up to people. I mean, a lot of people at conferences are kind of bored and looking to network anyway. So if you can go up to them and just give your elevator pitch to them, then they're often happy to chat with you. Joining organizations like STC or SOT work pretty well for that as well. I know a lot of organizations have student-specific events. They teach you how to network. They give you opportunities for networking, and you get to meet some of the the big players in the field. So the more you can get your name or your face out there, the better. And again, just always be friendly and smile lots, and hopefully with all those interactions that you have, hopefully something will eventually stick. And when you're looking for a job, don't be afraid to apply for everything that even seems remotely relevant to you. They'll tell you if they don't want you. If you see something that you could see yourself doing, or even not, it can't hurt to apply, and you only really have to make the decision on whether or not you want that job after they offer it to you. So hope that helps.
Amazing. So on that note of looking for jobs, so we found your career path was mainly within Canada. We have some attendees who are wondering about career options abroad, maybe with NGOs, international government organizations, and what you could do outside of Canada, essentially, with a toxicology degree.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have much experience with that. So within the forensic field, there are equivalents to me all over the world, in the death investigation side, the human performance toxicity. So things like doping. You can get a job with WADA, which would be pretty cool. I applied for a job with Nestle in Lausanne, Switzerland. Didn't get it, but the idea of working as a food toxicologist for a chocolate company really excited me. So that exists. I mean, the problems that occur within Canada are not unique to Canada. There are global issues. Some of the jobs look at problems from a global perspective, so environmental contaminants. Some jobs related to food are more localized to their food or pharmaceutical product, but these companies exist all over the world. So yeah, I don't know specifics about many of them, but they do exist. And yeah, hopefully through searching and through word of mouth, you'll be able to find some options there.
That's great. Thank you. Maybe on that note, we can kind of ask this question that came up about opportunities for career growth and lateral transitions within the field of toxicology. I know you mentioned there's a couple of you in each province, so that might be one, but are there other opportunities for growth that you've found so far in your career?
So personally, I'm sort of, in a way, I'm sort of at the top of what I can do as a forensic toxicologist. And that doesn't mean that I'm stuck in this job for the rest of my career. It just means that I'll really have to think outside the box if I want to advance. And I don't know if I want to advance. I like my job. The pay is pretty good. I do have opportunities for growth within my job itself. I through my UBC appointment, I can do research. But there's been discussion about whether I should do an MBA in the future and then take more of a management role, which at this moment does not appeal to me, but it might in the future. So yeah, I mean, never feel like you're stuck in a career, even if there's nowhere for you to go within that specific career path. There's always a way to use what you've learned, either direct job experience or just random skills that you've picked up along the way. If for all I know, 10 years I could be a software developer in a completely different field if I really stick to my coding. I didn't really grow up with computers in the same way that some of people who are younger than me on this call did. So I think I might have a little more difficulty with that, but it is an option in the future. So always keep an open mind to what what you've learned and who you know, and take it from there.
Amazing. And I will ask the last question for this session. And this one's a little bit multi-layered. So we have some attendees wondering if they come from different fields, such as you had mentioned being an MD and a toxicologist in your presentation. Some other individuals are wondering how much chemistry, like analytical chemistry versus organic chemistry, and how these feed into the field of toxicology. Especially because a lot of our attendees are undergrad, so they're wondering what like paths and courses they should take to get to the role as a toxicologist.
Yeah, that's a good question. So toxicology is such a broad field that sort of the sky is the limit with what can be done. So with respect to getting an MD, you can work in an emergency department as a medical toxicologist. So one of the key examples that Dr. Wells used to bring up to his undergrad class when I was TA for his course during my PhD was it's called the case of the frozen addict, and that was this issue where people were in the San Francisco area were trying to make a drug that was like meperidine or Demerol, and they did a bad job making it and basically made a very neurotoxic compound instead. So the medical toxicologist was evaluating people as they came into the emergency department, said, you are experiencing Parkinsonian-like symptoms, and this is a drug that is probably related to, the dopaminergic system. A lot of it has to deal with addiction and mental health, people who come in with drug overdoses, trying to figure out what the best course of action is to treat them when they're on a lot of different drugs that are sort of unknown at the time. So that's sort of the medical side. There's clinical chemists who do sort of what I do, but on the clinical side. So people who are, they basically run labs and take in samples from people who are hospitalized or on inpatient services within the healthcare system. Within the lab itself, we really like analytical chemists because we do analytical chemistry. We basically run mass specs all day, every day to look for drugs. Analytical chemistry will get you into sort of a lab type environment. It's not limited to forensic work. You can do drug discovery, pharmacokinetic studies, rely on mass spec knowledge, environmental testing for various contaminants. Again, you have to be able to detect them in order to study them. So that's important. Having a biochemistry or pharmacology background can be good for the study director pathway or the CRO type of work, to help with in the drug discovery pathway. I think of what other combinations are. Statisticians can be useful as well for things like risk assessment. So we have a substance in the environment. We need to know whether or not we should be concerned about it. Are we getting exposed to it? What does the chemistry say? What do the numbers say? So, you can get into the field of toxicology with all kinds of different backgrounds, and and just because you have an undergrad in one field doesn't mean that you can't, basically apply that knowledge and completely shift gears into something very different in grad school or in whatever career path you take. So I hope that helps.
It's very helpful. Thank you. And with that, I want to thank all of the attendees for their wonderful questions. There are some more in the chat, but due to our time constraints, I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them today. But many of these questions can be answered at our STC symposium that's coming up in late November, early December, as Nazem mentioned. And there'll be a great opportunity for some more networking, and perhaps we'll get to meet some of you in person. And with that, I just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Shapiro for sharing all of your perspectives, wisdom, and guidance with our students today, and to thank Nazem for sharing about the STC and the different graduate opportunities here. And thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you.